So you may be asking yourself, how do I fit in? You know, how do you fit in with the world and that sort of thing? How do you fit in with people that you are uncomfortable with or give you anxiety and that sort of thing? And the answer is, you have to build a structure. You have to crystallize your way of being in a way that aligns with other people's form, their design, okay? Everybody has their own space and their own structure to the way that they behave or they act, the way they perceive the world and that sort of thing. They have conceptualized ideas on how things are, how things ought to be, and that's how things are expected to be and that sort of thing. So people that have a structure to their lives or a path or a way of acting, they project this way onto others around them to try and sustain their own style of being, basically. So like a person that talks a lot will want to talk with other people, and so they may tell you to talk more, that sort of thing, in order for them to maintain that style of existing, that way of acting, okay? So by making other people talk more, it allows them to talk to those people, all right, and maintain their behavior or the way they've developed their lives, basically, okay? And there's a lot of different styles of behaving. People fall into different specializations, different professions, different categorizations, ways of living, okay? They become an artist, or they become a teacher, or they become a scientist, or something like that. And it's all different ways of acting, different ways of behaving, okay? And it all has a structure to it, a way of designing the space that they incorporate. And these spaces all fit together. Each one has their own barrier, a type of membrane that has a certain structure to it, and you can only pass into it a certain way, and there's layers and layers to it, right? So in order to become an artist or a teacher, that sort of thing, you have to acquire new ways of acting, new ways of structuring yourself, you know, your behavior and that sort of thing, the way you think. You have to structure it a way so that you can pass through that barrier, pass through that membrane that encapsulates that concept, encapsulates that subject or that specialization, okay? For introverted people, that's a bit difficult to do because they like to put themselves in space. They like to blend into the background, become nothing, basically. They don't like to become defined and stand out and, you know, be judged or considered one way or one type of person, right? Everybody's minds has a type of barrier to it, you know? All our minds are internalized in this structured way, all right? Our neurons are cycling this energy, and it allows it to kind of develop in its own isolated place, you know, free to become or think or conceptualize what it wants, all right? But of course, it's all influenced by the outside world, the pressures placed on it, you know? It's causing it to react and connect different things together based on, you know, what people become involved with. They can be all caught up in their minds and thinking about a lot of things, having all this energy wound up inside them, and having something outside themselves all of a sudden start affecting them in different ways. It disturbs the energies inside their mind. It disturbs their way of thinking. So the disturbance that occurs in the mind emerges as like an anxiety or a stress. They may not have been ready for it, or it may have been too quick. You know, they haven't put more thought into it to allow them to become comfortable with certain concepts and that sort of thing. So look at the camouflage. It's all distorted, it's all organic, causes it to blend in. And that's exactly what introverted people do. They take on this camouflaged nature to try and blend in to the world. They try to become part of the space, something that doesn't stand out, okay? And if they do that for a long time, it causes them to develop this emptiness or this nothingness, because it doesn't allow the world to impress itself into you. It kind of leaves you on your own. All right, so if you take this space and you're like a point in the space basically, and you have all these other structures outside floating around, right? These triangles and squares and circles and that sort of thing, and you're just kind of floating there. And these circles and triangles, they develop sides, they develop a structure to them, okay? These lines, these patterns, okay? And they're basically making new connections with life, okay? Different points. Just like you are a point in space, there are other things in space, other points, other people, and that sort of thing. So if you're always floating around in space and blending in to the background, you develop this desire to fit in. And if you look at what you are, you're camouflaged. You have all this distortions to your pattern, right? You have this organic nature, this like flowing way that's not structured in any specific ordered way, all right? You're this camouflage, okay? And you have all these other structured things around you. And that's basically what you have to do in order to fit in. You have to create more definition to yourself. You have to create more order to the way that you act. Create more connections with other points in space, okay? You got to communicate and create signals, connections, lines, pattern, and reinforce that by doing it consistently. And that allows you to fit in, and that allows you to create this pattern that's more rigid and more linear, rather than the distorted way that's more blended and confusing, okay? Some people don't want to do that. They don't want to become rigid and structured because it kind of makes them feel constrained, okay? If you're just floating around in space, maybe you like that because it allows you to kind of be free or not be controlled and that sort of thing. And I understand that. That's a good way to be sometimes. You don't have to be structured all the time, but you don't want to be, in space all of the time either, because then you start feeling like you don't belong in the world and that sort of thing. It could give you like depression or not make you feel all that good, because there's always like two sides to it. Just like there's connections between points, like every line has a beginning and an end to it. And if it's circular, every line, every circle has an inside and an outside, right? So there's always two sides. And you don't want to be always in space, because then you end up feeling empty and, unfulfilled and that sort of thing. But you don't want to always be in the line, because that makes you feel constricted and controlled all the time. So you have to kind of go from one side to the other side and create this dynamic being that understands more things, right? You don't want to get just connected to one thing and stay there all the time, but you don't want to float around and not feel anything and not be connected to anything at all, right? So that's just one way of interpreting it, and one way of learning how to deal with it, or how to think about fitting in or not fitting in, by looking at things in nature, things that are around you in the world, because everything expresses certain characteristics that make it either stand out or recede into the background. Just like the camouflage or the lines and spaces, everything has a structure to it, a pattern, or a way of dissolving that pattern, right?